Hi, hello, it's me, Julian Greystoke, trying to record another book review while I have the time, which is not a lot. So let us waste no time in reviewing Elatsoe. Let's read the blurb from Goodreads, shall we? Imagine an America very similar to our own. It's got homework, best friends, and pistachio ice cream. There are some differences. This America has been shaped dramatically by magic, monsters, knowledge, and legend of its peoples, those indigenous and those who are not. Some of these forces are charmingly everyday, like the ability to make an orb of light appear or travel across the world through rings of fungi. But other forces are less charming and should never have seen the light of day. Elatsoe lives in this slightly stranger America. She can raise the ghosts of dead animals, a skill passed down through generations of her Lipan Apache family. Her beloved cousin has been murdered in a town that wants no prying eyes. But she is going to do more than pry. The picture-perfect facade of Willoughby masks gruesome secrets, and she will rely on her wits, skills, and friends to tear off the mask and protect her family. Bum bum bum. So this book has been on my radar for a while. It's one of those books that everybody says I should read because it has an asexual main character. Is that true? Yes. Yes, indeed. She is asexual. It is said on the page, so that was exciting. And there were a lot of exciting things to tempt me about this book, and overall, I did enjoy my time with it. But there were a couple of flaws that definitely brought the rating down from 5 stars for me, so we will definitely talk about those, as well as the things that I enjoyed in Elatsoe. I'm glad that I listened to the audiobook because honestly I had no idea how to pronounce her name otherwise, but she also goes by Ellie. I'm going to be checking back in with my Goodreads review to make sure I remember everything, because I actually read this like last week and haven't had a chance to sit down and film a review of it, but I really wanted to get a review of it because it's an ace book and I'm an asexual human. So I gotta review it, right? That's the rules. By the way, if you hear scuttling and other noises, there were ferrets loose in this house. Just normal things, you know? The main character of this book, has ghost dogs. I have living ferrets, and probably ghost ferrets too, let's be honest. So let's just start where I always start, with the characters. The characters were pretty good. They weren't amazing, but they were definitely better than paper thin. We have the main character of Ellie, we have her mother and her father with whom she has a good relationship, and we have her platonic best friend who is a guy who I love. We'll talk about him in a minute. Ellie herself is a fine character, I feel. A perfectly serviceable lead character. She does have a little bit of the sort of lead character syndrome where you are kind of meant to project yourself onto her as a teenage reader, so she's a little bit more bland than she could be. And one thing I do notice about her is that she is very removed from her emotions and other people's emotions. And I don't know if that was intentional, and that comes down a little bit to the writing style, which we'll talk about later, but along with being asexual, I kind of wonder if maybe she was supposed to be a little bit on the autism spectrum because of the way we didn't really get a whole lot of emotion from her. Like, she didn't seem to process her emotions in the way you might expect. And then she looked at other people's emotions in sort of a separate and withdrawn manner as like maybe a problem to be solved. It's just like the way it was addressed, it seemed kind of like maybe that was the direction the author was trying to lead us in, but I have no idea actually, because that is not on the page, unlike the fact that she is asexual. And that does come up, and she has never really, I think she's aromantic as well. She doesn't seem to have any interest in romantic relationships, and that's perfectly fine and reasonable. That's something I do a lot in my books as well, is my asexual characters tend to be aromantic, because especially if the book is not about being asexual, I don't necessarily want to dive into the whole great convoluted spectrum that is being asexual and not aromantic, or aromantic and not asexual. So a lot of times, especially when you're writing for people who are not on the ace spectrum, it's easier to just be like, aro ace. Elatsoe, as we mentioned, can summon ghost dogs, specifically her one dog, Kirby. She has a spaniel named Kirby who died, which she's very, very connected with, and so Ghost Kirby, the dog, follows her around, and he has certain ghost powers, such as his howl, which can like deafen people and break eardrums and cause a lot of chaos. So she can use him to defend herself, and he's the sweetest good boy. Of course he is. He's a doggo. This book has a lot of love for animals, which is something else that I loved about it. Kirby is best boy. 10 out of 10 ghost dog. Now let's talk about the best friend character. Of course I don't remember his name because I can never remember characters' names, but he is absolutely a cinnamon roll, and you know I love a cinnamon roll. He's just a sweet guy. He's there to vibe. He reminds me a lot of the character, I don't know if you've watched the Miss Marvel show, but he reminds me of that white boy adopted by a brown family, like same vibes, same vibes. So he is her bestie, and they've been besties forever, and their relationship is just so wholesome, 10 out of 10 wholesomeness. He is a descendant, a very long descendant of Oberon, king of the fairies, so he has very small magical ability himself, which we find out about in the book. It doesn't hugely come up, but it's a little bit more to world build. Again, we'll talk about the world building in a minute. But I loved him as a character. He reminded me a lot of my husband. He's a male cheerleader who is a vegetarian and is an absolute cinnamon roll. So 10 out of 10, no notes. And then we have Ellie's parents who play a part, her mother more than her father, but it is really refreshing to see a story where we have a teenage lead character and her family is not neglectful. They don't abandon her. Like when she decides that she's gonna go use her ghost powers to solve her cousin's murder, her family is like 100% on board. They're like, okay, we will drive you there. We will support you 100%. And I'm like, we love to see it. I want more stories where the teenagers have powers and their family like supports it and enables them to go do the cool heroic things. Because Ellie is able to tell that her cousin was murdered and it wasn't an accident, and her family they believe her and they take her there to investigate. Obviously, they still want to protect her, but I love how much of a part of the story they are, especially her mother, specifically her mother. Her father's not in it as much. And you also have the character who we never see, but who we have many stories of, which is her sixth great grandmother. They call her sixth great, and it took me a little while listening to the audiobook to understand what they were saying, but it is sixth great grandmother. And she was also able to summon undead hounds. She had like this whole pack of undead dogs. And so she and Elatsoe are kind of like bonded. They have the same name. We hear a lot of stories about sixth great and all of the things that she did back in her time. So we understand the deep connection that Ellie shares with sixth great as two people who have very similar powers, and just the power of ancestors and women ancestors and the power that women have through their culture and their history, which I really, really loved. Then there's the villain character who is just pretty much your bog standard, he's just bad. There's a lot of room for nuance with that character, and I was really hoping we would get some, but nuance who? He just really turns out to be an evil guy out for himself and his own ends. So that's disappointing. This book reminded me a lot of the Blood Like Magic series, except for maybe a little bit less complicated, especially in the world building. But they're both very similar in that we have a United States, well, in Blood Like Magic it's Canada, but a United States here where magic has always existed and different cultures have different magics, and there is a wealthy white man who is up to no good. And I am all in favor of eat the rich, but even if we still come down on the side of they are very bad and need to go away, there can still be some nuance there, and I wish there was a little bit. Just to use one of my own books as an example, at least what I'm trying to do in my own books, I'm not saying I succeeded flawlessly, but in Adventurer Mage, which you can see behind me, we have some wealthy assholes who are the villains, but we do get a little taste of their point of view a couple of times, just to show you a little bit of nuance to who they are. A little bit of how they got to be the way that they are, even though in the end we come down on the side of, yes, they are bad men, there's nuance. A little bit. And I wish there was a little bit in this, because the way it's set up, there's so much room for nuance. So much room for nuance with the villain, and instead he's just like finger-tentingly evil, and we celebrate when he gets his comeuppance. I'm trying to be a little bit more vague because I do want you to go read this book, so. But now let's talk about the world building, because the world building let this book down considerably. Here we have a United States where magic has always been around, and all of these different cultures, you know, America, the melting pot, all of these different cultures have different magics that they have brought with them. So like Elatsoe obviously has the magic of her people, but her friend, her bestie, has the magic because he's like from a Celtic nation, so he has Oberon blood, fairy blood in him, though it is very, very, very distilled. So like you have all of these things, and there's vampires here also. And there's a great moment with vampires that I might talk about later. That's really all you get. You see Elatsoe's powers, hers specifically. You see that people can use fairy rings as transportation, like instant teleportation, ring to ring. But at the same time, it's not used very often. Like, Elatsoe and her mother have to drive to the town where her cousin was. So, like, fairy rings can't get you everywhere. Minimum usefulness, I guess. Better than driving to some places. And then you have her bestie who has, like, one very small power. And the villain who has a power. But we really don't see how magic has affected this version of the United States, because if there's that much magic and that many varied powers at play, like you can never know when you meet a person what sort of magical powers they may or may not have. So like the world should feel different, and the only different thing is that there are vampires here and you can use fairy rings to travel. Everything else feels exactly the same as the United States we are living in now, and that was really disappointing because there's so much that would have changed if magic had always been there, and so many different varieties of magic had always been there. So that's the biggest thing that lets this book down, is it backs away from like all of its world building. It seems to maybe approach, and it backs away from a lot of things actually. It seems to maybe approach something and then chickens out and backs off of it. Which is one thing I will say that Blood Like Magic did better. It tended to not chicken out, whereas this book will chicken out. Now the plot. So you think it's going to be a murder mystery, and it kind of is, but honestly, like the murder mystery isn't that good. It's intriguing-ish as you're trying to figure out like what kind of magic the villain has, but there's a pretty clear villain right away, and there's never a twist where he turns out not to be the villain. The twist is like, what kind of magic does he have? And you can figure it out pretty early. I'm certain young readers, maybe it would have taken them longer, but you're waiting for this entire plot for something to be a surprise, and it very seldom is. And once again, I feel like the author kept coming up with cool ideas and then backing off of them. There's some really dark, potentially dark elements, especially with Elatsoe and her powers, and like ways that her powers could go awry. So she's got these rules that she needs to follow because dealing with the dead can be extremely dangerous. And you as the reader are going, oh, okay, she's gonna break these rules at some point. Like she's gonna have to do something that's really, really risky or really, really foolish to save the day, and it's gonna screw her over. But no, not really. Like she does do something dangerous at the end, but she handles it perfectly, and really no consequences whatsoever for that. It felt like the author kept coming up with these cool ideas that could have been really deeper, darker, more interesting, more dangerous, more impactful, and then backing off of them to give us just like, and then everything worked out, and then everything was perfectly happy. Nothing bad happened, actually. And it was disappointing. This may be one of the only books where I feel that the dog should have died. Like, yes, the dog was already dead, but there was a moment where I felt the dog should have moved on, because the stakes of this plot kept feeling stakey and then having the stakes ripped away because the characters always solved everything very easily. Some people have mentioned that this book is young adult, but it feels like middle grade, and that's one of the ways that it definitely feels like middle grade. The author was very tentative about really endangering anybody, really going deeper with a lot of the darker elements that this plot could bring to the table. Like, yes, somebody was murdered, and that was pretty horrifying, but there's a lot of stuff that the author could have done that she backs away from every time. And finally, let's talk about the writing and the style. The style, really, not so much the prose as the style, was one of the main reasons that this book did not get a 5-star from me. I just didn't like the style. It was very removed. It was very emotionless. It was just, these are the things that are happening. I wouldn't necessarily call it all telling and no showing, because there was definitely showing going on. And you guys know I can't stand a story that's all telling. I despise them. I know that there's a market for them and some people love them, but not me. It is not me. I needed some showing. And this book did that, but everything felt very removed. People were having emotions, but you felt removed from them. I never was able to become emotionally invested in any of the characters except maybe the ghost dog, but that's because he's a ghost dog, and if you can't tell by the cat on my lap, I'm naturally inclined to like and bond with animals. While the writing was fine, the style just wasn't for me. I really wish that the author had utilized the fact that this is a young adult book, and those tend to rely very heavily on emotion. This really relied way more heavily on plot than character or emotion, and unfortunately that left me as a reader personally kind of high and dry. If you don't mind a book that is really plot focused and not going to spend a whole lot of time with the characters' emotions, then this might be the book for you. If you're just looking for an interesting, diverting read with an ace main character, this might be the book for you. If you're looking for anything that goes deeper and truly explores any themes that it sets up, this book is probably going to leave you disappointed. Now, it says that it's the first in a series, but when I went to look, the author is not writing the second book in the series, but in fact the prequel to the series, and I almost feel like she doesn't know what happens next. Like, there are things that are definitely left open for the next book. This book does have a beginning, middle, and end. This book does have closure, so that's good. That's great. Love to see it. But there's a lot of stuff that can carry on to the next book, and answers that we could potentially get in the next book, except we're not getting a next book. We're getting a prequel, and I feel like that's not the best idea. Personally, that's just my taste. Like, I would like to read the next book in the series. I want to find out what happens to Elatsoe. And as cool as her, like, great-grandmother who summoned a woolly mammoth ghost is very cool, I don't really need to follow her story. That's what the prequel book's gonna be about, and I'm like, I don't care about her enough to want to follow her story. I want to know what happens next with Elatsoe. There was threads that I thought that we were gonna pick up that didn't get picked up. Like, I'll just tell you, I don't mind spoiling this because I don't even know if this is actually going to be a plot point or this was just meant to show us that magic was at play. But when they go to the weird little town where her cousin lived, where he died, and they're trying to solve the mystery, they discover that there are fairy ring mushrooms all over the place. And I was like, oh, we're alluding to this town. Like, I thought the whole town, since it's like this weird mystery little town, a little bit Stepford Wivesy, was able to like pick up and teleport itself somewhere else. I thought that's what we were leading towards with the hint of these fairy ring mushrooms. But that never came up, and I honestly don't know why the fairy ring mushrooms were mentioned at all, except to indicate that magic was at play here, I guess, but we already knew that. Don't know what was going on. Drop thread, in my opinion. But that could be a book 2 thing, except we're not getting a book 2. I'm upset by that, which is weird, because I usually don't care about series. Oh, alright. One little spoiler, because I think it's really fun. This is not a book-breaking spoiler, just a little bitty one that I enjoy the hell out of, to do with the vampires, because this is a clever way to use your premise. This was one of the only clever ways that the premise was used, but I love this, and more of this, please. So we have Elatsoe and her mother are driving, and they're being attacked by a vampire. He's attacking their car. And Elatsoe's mother looks to the vampire and says, I uninvite you from my people's land. This is our land. I uninvite you from it. You have to leave. And it works. And the vampire's like, why is this working? Like, I pay taxes. And she's like, not to my people, you don't. Get the fuck off our land. And I'm like, this is how we use the magic of all these different cultures in our new version of America. Like, more of this, please, I am begging, because that just filled me with so much joy, and I was laughing out loud at work, just being like, yes, oh my god, I love that so much. Why was that the only time that I was able to do that in this book? That's the thing, that was the only time. Bit of a missed opportunity there, in my opinion, to really go deeper on the world building and create this world of these clashing magics of these different cultures and how they work together or work against each other. There just could have been so much there. And maybe in future books, if the author decides to write any of them. Alright, this went far longer than it probably should have, and I need to go make myself some lunch. So thank you all for watching. As you know, you can purchase any of my books, available now on Amazon. If you're looking for fantasy stories with asexual characters, hit me up. When you're done reading Elatsoe, come read Adventurer Mage or Boots. You will find some great asexual characters, and awesome friendships in that one. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!